It gives me great pleasure to introduce, to those of you who don't already know him, Kurt Caswell, whom I met 13 years ago because of, or through, the agency of Barry Lopez and Diane Warner and Bill Tiedemann, when they put together a retreat for us all. We were at that time, were we emerging writers at that time? We were sort of emerging. At Junction, Texas, a very, very memorable moment, and I've admired his career ever since. Kurt teaches writing and literature at the Honors College here at Texas Tech. Among his many publications are 2 books of nonfiction, both published by Trinity University Press, most recently, Getting to Gray Owl, Journeys on 4 Continents, and In the Sun's House, My Year Teaching on the Navajo Reservation. Please welcome Kurt Caswell.
So after the election, a friend of mine put a call out for writers to write letters to America. And because there was so much, in my circle anyway, there's so much despair, I thought I would address this idea of despair. So that's where this little piece came from. I sent it to this friend editor, and he rejected it, unfortunately. He said, "Sorry, hombre." So I'm reading you a rejected piece. And then there's some heavy text, so I thought I would give you some visual. So it's just all text, no pretty pictures. So we'll call it A Letter to America. I don't believe in despair anymore. I don't believe in despair anymore. I despair, but I no longer believe despair is a path to follow. Not so long ago, maybe even yesterday, despair was a path I followed to prove that I cared deeply about our nation and about our world and its creatures. I had learned from Joseph Campbell that this world I love yields but one ending: death, disintegration, dismemberment, and the crucifixion of our heart with the passing of the forms that we have loved. And I learned from Marcus Aurelius that it's personal. Very soon you will be dead. Who can bear such pain? I thought despair was a way to bear it. Then one day it came to me that despair is not love. I don't mean it came to my intellect. I traveled to this kind of understanding years ago, maybe with Wordsworth, who was surprised by joy. I mean that I came to know that despair is not love in my body, in my heart and lungs and blood. I felt it, and so I decided not to believe in despair anymore. The proper question now is, what, if anything, do I believe in? Frost, the American poet Frost was walking with a friend one day, maybe in the Vermont woods, even when the leaves were turning, excuse me, when the leaves were turning and his mind was turning poems out like the leaves. And it seemed that on that day, on a day like that, the world would just keep on going on forever, or that you'd want it to. But it was getting dark, and night was falling all around them. Frost said to his friend, "Well, we'd better get back." The friend, visibly distressed, and turned to Frost and said, "We just don't have enough time for everything, do we, Robert?" Frost stopped there in the darkling wood that was his home, that is his home still, and he said, "You know, it's really quite the opposite. We have all the time in the world, too much time, in fact." If you have done your reading in quantum physics, then you know that Frost is right. One of my teachers, Robert Pack, a poet who has been called the inheritor of Robert Frost, has written a cycle of poems after the work of physicist Heinz Pagels. Here's the epigraph to Pack's poem, Proton Decay, a passage from Pagels' book, The Cosmic Code. Most visible matter, stars, galaxies, and gas clouds, is made of hydrogen, and the nucleus of the hydrogen atom is a single proton. If protons decay, then the very substance of the universe is slowly rotting away like a cancer that infects matter itself. This rotting away of matter will, according to these unified field theories, take about 1,000 billion 10 to the 21st times the present age of the universe. We will have lots of time to explore the universe before it vanishes. Nothing is forever, even the universe, Pagels tells us, but 1,000 billion times the present age of the universe, which is, as of today, about 13.82 billion years old, is plenty of time for everything human beings might wish to do or wish to say. And yet, an individual does not get that impossible distance of time for themselves. We get only a fragment. So with such an understanding of time, what do we do with what time we do have, we who are not yet dead? How am I to live my life? How are you to live your life? In the poem that follows Pagels' words, Pack offers a kind of answer. So let us be bound by flowing grace of words that cherish, words that touch across what mortal time and space remain. Don't believe in despair, Pack is saying, but live bound by flowing grace. And living bound by flowing grace sounds pretty good to me. It sounds like an echo of Frost, who tells us we have all the time in the world. Remember Keats, who in his Ode to a Nightingale considers the ending of his life a possible escape from despair. Did I get that? Now, more than ever, seems it rich to die. 4 lines later, he comes to understand that death ultimately fails to end despair because his nightingale, he realizes, will sing on beyond him. It will sing on despite him, and he will not be there to love it. Keats doesn't really want to die, but to end despair. The thought of leaving the world and its beauties before his time, the thought of giving up, shames him. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain? To thy high requiem become a sod. Notice the caesura, the long silence after the word vain, where Keats imagines the world going on without him. The other meaning of that word, vain, has to be vanity. It's vanity to imagine that you matter in the turning of the cosmos, and it's vanity to imagine that you matter not at all. You do matter, you are matter, but you can't save the world. You can't even save yourself. You can only live your life right now, and perhaps the only way to live your life right now is to inhabit, to reside in a state of awe, the way Keats experiences his nightingale. Perhaps it's best to look up at that bird in the tree. Thou was not born for death, immortal bird. To look out at the tree on the horizon, to look over that horizon into the forever beyond, to let the warm love in and say, I wonder what is going to happen next. Darwin, who even in looking onto the world and finding it red in tooth and claw, marveled at it, he couldn't help but ask questions and seek their answers. He was that kind of fellow, but he had also a poet in him. The last few sentences of On the Origin of Species might as well be a few lines by Keats. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Darwin sees nature as a war which results in famine and death, but from that famine and death arises forms most beautiful and wonderful. We might all find some comfort in knowing there really isn't anything wrong with the world. The world is just the way it's supposed to be. There is war and famine, there are beauties and wonders. Once in Idaho, the Dalai Lama said so. Notice this phrase too in Darwin, originally breathed. Don't you find here an echo of the creation of Adam, the first man, that miracle of a handful of clay animated by the breath of God? And notice this wording too, beginning, endless. Those words are out of context. Beginning is paired with the words before it and endless with the words following it. The line goes like this: from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful. But seeing the words side by side, do they not speak to a world that is forever beginning, not forever ending, or forever middling? It is in our nature to seek stability, but stability is not stable. Stability is stasis, equilibrium, death. Change is stable, a dynamic system through which the energy of the cosmos flows. Change is how the cosmos works, beginning again and again, forever, for 10 to the 21st times the present age of the universe. This understanding is what struck Darwin so, not with despair, but with amazement. Hamlet too casts out despair, and it takes of him his entire life to achieve this. You need not have read the play inside 20 years, or ever, to know that in Act 3, Hamlet asks to be or not to be. That is the question Keats asks, and the same question you're asking. Is this world any longer worth living in? Is it worth living for? What you may not remember, or what you may have never known, because posing Hamlet's question is so terrifying, it devours all thought after, is that Hamlet answers the question. He moves beyond despair to a place somewhere on the other side. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows what it is to leave betimes, let be. As a human being, as a man, Hamlet moves from question to answer, from to be or not to be, all the way to let be. What an astonishing journey, a miracle really, and more miracle to know that it's the journey we all seek to make. So let's say we begin our journey to be or not to be, and arrive at let be. What then? If we don't believe in despair anymore, do we now have something worthy to take its place? Oops. Yeats tells us in his poem Lapis Lazuli that what may take the place of despair is gaiety transfiguring all that dread. I like this word, transfiguring, because more rightly, we don't have gaiety flowing in and dread flows out, or joy flowing in, where despair flows out. The one does not replace the other. We have joy transfiguring despair, changing its shape from what it was to what it can be. Does this not tell you that joy is part of despair, that joy lives inside despair? Did you not know that somewhere inside you are already happy? In the poem, Yeats describes a scene carved on this piece of lapis lazuli, 3 Chinese men and a long-legged bird, a symbol of longevity. And what are these Chinese men doing? Yeats writes, "The little halfway house those Chinamen climb towards, and I delight to imagine them seated there on the mountain and the sky, on all the tragic scene they stare. One asks for mournful melodies. Accomplished fingers begin to play. Their eyes, mid many wrinkles, their eyes, their ancient, glittering eyes, are gay." Seated up on that mountaintop, these Chinese men look out over the world from their advantage. Not from their vantage, but from their advantage. Notice that their eyes glitter and that the view from this height gives them pleasure. This is Yeats' meaning. One proper view of the world is from on high, from this great distance where the tragic scene below does not so overwhelm and terrify. You can't live your whole life entangled in the world. You have to step outside it once in a while. Despair will have no trouble finding you across the arc of your life, but if you climb into the heights and have a look back at the world, if you invite witness to triumph over judgment, you will more easily find your way back to Hamlet's "Let be." The sooner you climb up, the better for you, the better for us all. Early in the poem, Yeats affirms that all things fall. Who can bear such a weight? But the line continues, and are built again. This is not hope. This is action. Action without hope. So all things fall and are built again. Between these movements, between falling and building, or building after falling, you find no break or pause, no caesura. Falling is part of building, just as despair is part of joy. There is harmony here, those mournful melodies in the dynamic of falling and building. And gratefully, Yeats gives us a following line to affirm action, to affirm necessity and purpose. The whole of it goes like this: all things fall and are built again, and those that build them again are gay. Here is not just a formula, but a task. Take that, hombre. All right, I'm here to introduce Jordan. So as Jordan said,
Not the light switches.
it's the one behind the plant. As Jordan said, we met a number of years ago, and it's been a pleasure to correspond with him and work with him, read with him. And I'll give you a little bit of information about him. Jordan Fisher Smith spent 21 years as a park and wilderness ranger in California, Idaho, Wyoming, and Alaska. His memoir of working under the waterline of the long delay Auburn Dam, titled Nature Noir, was a BookSense bestseller, and the New York Times called it eloquently meditative. The Boston Globe said it was daringly original and gorgeously nuanced. Newsweek said, quote, he writes about the natural world with more grace than anyone since Edward Abbey. Jordan's new book, the title of which is Engineering Eden, was a nominee for the 2017 Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award and is now a finalist for the California Book Award. The Wall Street Journal calls it, quote, intensely reported, rousingly readable, and ambitiously envisioned. Jordan has also written for The New Yorker, Time.com, Men's Journal, The Daily Beast, and Discover. He appeared in and narrated a documentary film about Lyme disease. The title is Under Our Skin, which was on the 2010 Oscar shortlist for Best Documentary Feature and a 2014 sequel. So we're lucky and privileged to have Jordan Fisher-Smith.
I think we should all leave that up. No, you could turn it off if you want, or if not. I was just knocked out by what Kurt just did. It seems to me to be a case where somebody who is in academic life is not just churning things that other people did, but making a kind of transcendent beauty in that work. And I was just knocked out. Thank you for that. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said that the law, well, I should say, first, I'll just say, what this is basically a courtroom drama about figuring out how to restore nature and what happens if you get it really wrong and somebody dies. With that in mind, I'll say that Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said that the law is the witness to an external deposit of our moral development as a civilization. Just so, by 1972, when it turned a century old, Yellowstone National Park was the witness to an external deposit of our ecological development, and the news wasn't that good. I should say that Yellowstone was the best of our efforts in that regard. The great slag heaps of the Rust Belt and the ruined mines bleeding acid into streams were the worst. But Yellowstone was, after all, represented, and the other first national parks represented our aspiration to really pay attention to and do a good job. Nevertheless, in the beginning, when they created Yellowstone in 1872, which was 4 years before Custer's last stand, they hadn't thought to create laws that would protective laws that could be enforced to keep it safe, nor did they really have anybody to enforce them. And in the early years, there was a mass of market hunting that decimated elk, bison, beaver. So on it went, and in the late 19th century, they developed enforcement authorities and eventually sent the army in to enforce them. And then they began trying to rebuild these herds of ungulates and bison and so on, at which point that effort merged with the effort to get rid of predators, notably wolves and cougars, which became a national policy in 1915, and the Park Service joined it enthusiastically in 1918. By 1926, they killed the last wolves in Yellowstone, and nobody saw cougar there for most of the 20th century. Meanwhile, they were getting more and more effective at putting out fires, and as the predators went away, they very quickly realized that elk were ballooning out of all proportion with their sustenance on the land, and they began causing major, major damage to vegetation at Yellowstone and in other places. And so, beginning in 1934, rangers went out and began shooting thousands of them in order to balance the population with what they thought, the land could support. Meanwhile, since the early days, they had allowed bears to feed at open garbage dumps that were located conveniently close to hotels and campgrounds, and also to feed from trash receptacles, and to feed the black bears in particular, to feed from the hands of human beings and from what they could steal in the campgrounds and so on. Then just about the time Rachel Carson's Silent Spring comes out, there was a sort of awakening within the Park Service and a recognition of how messed up things were. That winter of 1961-62, park rangers at Yellowstone shot 4,300 plus elk in one winter as an attempt to fight back the numbers and get them in balance with the vegetation. And there was beginning to be talk about closing open garbage dumps and doing something about garbage in general at the national parks. Then this movement, this sort of restoration movement, fragmented into two forms. One was everything that we've done so far, or everything we've gotten wrong, was the result of doing stuff. So we need to stop doing stuff and give nature a break. That is, after all, what this place was about. It's the place we don't do stuff. The other form was, yeah, but things have gone so far that we cannot walk away from it now. We need to continue to manipulate it. Into this, I should say that on the approach of the centennial in 1972, there was a great awareness of creating the national parks as showpieces to show the rest of the world what we'd done for 100 years. There was a great hullabaloo at Yellowstone. They invited scientists and park managers from 84 nations to come and see the accomplishment of Yellowstone. And meanwhile, they were trying to keep their finger in the dike with the problems that they had and not let people know. Into this hitchhiked a young man by the name of Harry Eugene Walker, who left Alabama that summer to have the Great American Road Trip after working very, very hard all his life. He really had never had a vacation. He was a good man, a good young man. And to make a long story short, he hitchhiked into the middle of the celebration at Yellowstone, having not really intended when he left home to go there. They dedicated a new visitor center. The senator from Wyoming and the governor of Wyoming came up and they dedicated a new visitor center at Old Faithful. And a few hours later, almost within view of the visitor center, Harry Eugene Walker was dragged into the woods screaming by a grizzly bear with 20 years of history with people and a tag in its ear and eaten. This then wound up in federal court. And the case became a kind of referendum on when we mess up nature, how much do we allow ourselves to manipulate it to get it back in shape? How much do we respect wildness, remaining wildness, and the autonomy of nature? Is there an autonomous nature still? And what happens if we get it seriously wrong? Is the government responsible? I'm going to read to you a little passage from chapter 21, and you'll meet Harry Walker at this point is still at home in Alabama working his tail off. You'll meet the man who will be the sort of exemplary great ranger in this book who investigates Harry's death for the Park Service, Jim Brady. And you'll see Jim Brady involved in trapping thousands of elk or hundreds of elk after they called off shooting them in the naturalness. They started going with naturalness. So we're not going to shoot anymore. We'll just trap them and ship them away on trucks to other places where we can give them away to state fish and game. You'll see him trapping elk. You'll see mention or hear mention of the two leave it alone, let it be natural people in the book, who are Glenn Cole, who was a student of Adolph Murray, and his superintendent of the new superintendent of the park. And let's see, there'll be a mention of the Walker family attorney, Stephen Zetterberg. And the Let It Natural people are about to rapidly close the dumps without doing anything else. They're not putting safe storage for food in the campgrounds. There's no such thing as a backpacker canister yet. They have not secured the trash receptacles, but these open dumps represent a great insult to naturalness, and they're about to bury them with dirt very rapidly. Their idea is that bears will go back to their natural diet. By 1970, Harry Walker had become a familiar face at the Smokehouse, a brick-fronted billiards hall with front windows looking out on the main business street of Anniston, half a block, that's Anniston, Alabama, half a block from the white marble courthouse where Assistant U.S. Attorney Spivak later took depositions from the Alabama witnesses. He was a grown man now, 23, 6'1", long and lean, all muscle and gristle, with a ready smile that showed his big, even white teeth. He dressed in blue jeans, tight white t-shirts that his mother kept bleached, and plaid shirts. He liked to shoot pool, but the smokehouse was also part of a whole mosaic of side jobs he cobbled together for extra income. Although he worked long hours on his father's farm, the dairy didn't make enough to pay him a full salary. So in addition to the smokehouse, where he racked the balls and charged the players a few dollars, at various times, Harry worked the night shift at a pipe foundry, spent a couple of weeks on an oil rig off the Gulf Coast, and crewed on a shrimp boat out of Mobile. Based on his experience with farm machines, the National Guard trained him as a heavy equipment operator, and he brokered this skill into yet another job, running a backhoe for an Anniston construction company. When the mail carrier on the Walker's rural route was looking for a substitute for vacations and sick days, he asked Harry. Harry signed up and got that job too. Harry's life was laid out before him, like the cows that had worn their habitual trails in the red clay from the lower pasture to the milking barn. Harry would mark the hours of his life, treading the same paths his daddy did, and at least for now, he would have to work all those other jobs as well. At Yellowstone, that spring of 1970, a newly promoted 30-year-old subdistrict ranger was sent down from Mammoth Hot Springs to take over day-to-day operations at Old Faithful Village. Jim Brady was not a big man, but he had played college football, and he exuded physical confidence. His manner was thoughtful, polite, and deferential. He had a way of making people feel like they had his total attention when they talked to him. And among his subordinates, he had a reputation for being preternaturally cool in emergencies. Brady had grown up in San Bernardino, where the smog drifting east from Los Angeles met the dust and tumbleweeds of the Mojave Desert. His father was a brakeman for the Santa Fe Railroad there, and when Brady was 14, his old man was hit by a train and put out of work. As the family slipped into poverty, Brady discovered football, which earned him an athletic scholarship to Humboldt State University in the coastal rainforests of Northern California. In addition to lumber mills and muddy scrimmages, Humboldt was known for turning out foresters and wildlife biologists. Brady majored in botany and zoology and married his high school sweetheart. By the time he graduated in 1962, he was working as a seasonal park ranger and very much wanted to be a permanent one. That summer, his wife gave birth to their first child at Yellowstone National Park. Brady's specialty within the Park Service, as opposed to a scientist such as Glenn Cole, he's the Let It Be Natural chief scientist of Yellowstone at that moment, as opposed to a scientist such as Glenn Cole or a ranger naturalist whose job was to give out information to visitors and teach people about nature, was to make sure the comings and goings of millions of visitors went smoothly and to see to it that they went home in one piece. In the early 1960s, when Brady came on the scene, the Park Service was diversifying its traditional fare of awe-inspiring scenery with new parks where the emphasis was on pure outdoor recreation. Brady got his first permanent job in 1963 at one of these units, Lake Mead, the reservoir formed by the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. Just outside of Las Vegas, Lake Mead National Recreation Area was a 24-hour bacchanal of alcohol, high-powered boats, firearms, and assorted other weapons. It was a gladiator school for young law enforcement rangers. By the time he transferred back to Yellowstone in November of 1967, Brady had been shot at 3 times. About the first thing they found for him to do when he got back to Yellowstone was to fly around the Lamar Valley as an observer in a helicopter, chasing elk through the snow into winged fences and corrals that by then were referred to not so affectionately as McGee traps. After the beating the Park Service had taken in Senator McGee's hearings that March, they weren't shooting any elk, and as Glenn Cole implemented the Natural Control Program, it was the last time they would even give any away, 984 of them that winter. From the helicopter, beneath a ceiling of snow clouds, the Lamar Valley was a study in blue, gray, and black, and orange where a shaft of low sun stole under the weather to light a distant peak. It had been snowing, and the icy wind had blown the powder off the ridges and into the gullies and low spots, where it settled in hundreds of parallel paths generations of elk had engraved into the mountainsides in their desperate search for sustenance. The elk trails stood out as white lines across the stony slopes, like the contours of a topographic map. The helicopter shook as the pilot swooped back and forth, herding strings of elk through the deep snow in the gullies. After the mayhem in Las Vegas, for Brady, this was like coming home, and from the tiny bubble-canopied craft, the immensity of the valley and the white elk paths were beautiful, and it all looked convincingly like wilderness. Brady made a good account of himself in 1968 and 1969 in the North District at Mammoth Hot Springs, and in 1970 he was made the Old Faithful Subdistrict Ranger. Old Faithful Village is located along the Grand Loop Road in the valley of the Firehole River, in the western part of Yellowstone. The meadows surrounding it are bounded on the east by the timbered ridge of Observation Point, and on the west by the dark lava bluffs at the eastern edge of the Madison Plateau. In those days, the village contained some 400 buildings, the greater number of them tiny brown-painted guest cabins and other small structures. The ruling presences were two large historic hotels on the north end, facing a circular plank causeway around an aperture from which, at intervals of just over an hour, the Old Faithful geyser erupted over 100 feet in the air. Beyond the geyser, paths and boardwalks extended north into the upper geyser basin and up the rounded white slope of Geyser Hill. The hill and the valley in the distance were dotted with clouds of steam rising from geysers and hot pools. The Grand Loop Road had been constructed by Army engineers in the early days as a dirt wagon track. By 1970, it was a 142-mile strip of asphalt, 22 feet wide, connecting Old Faithful to the other clusters of hotels and cabins, stores, cafes, visitor centers, marinas, and campgrounds in the park. These features constituted less than 5% of the total area of the park, but absorbed over 95% of the rangers' energy. A project to divert the road around Old Faithful Village was completed for the centennial summer of 1972. But when Jim Brady took over in 1970, on an average summer day between 11 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, from 600 to 800 cars, trucks, buses, and motorhomes rolled right through the village. At intervals of about 65 minutes, when the geyser went off, drivers of passing cars would stop in the middle of the road, everyone would pile out with their cameras, and the Grand Loop would become gridlocked in both directions. There was no getting a patrol car or an ambulance through, and as one of his first administrative actions, Brady put in a request for a motorcycle. Vehicle fires, forest fires, lost children and pets, fist fights over parking places or other imagined slights, spousal disputes, thefts, and the delivery of emergency messages to call home about the death of an aunt were all part of the job. Brady's life was a strange juxtaposition of quiet, sage-scented moments watching elk and bison grazing slowly across the meadows, and other moments that embodied the whole intense pageant of human existence from birth to sudden death. In June of 1970, he found himself stepping gingerly toward the edge of a pool of boiling hot water in the upper geyser basin with a rope around his waist, held by another ranger, and carrying a bucket of strong soap. A 9-year-old boy walking through the geysers with his family had stumbled off the boardwalk and fallen into the pool. His mother and father heard the splash and turned round to see him surface with a shocked expression, then sink and die. He was boiled until the meat fell off his bones. It had been known since the turn of the century, when it was done for the entertainment of tourists, that soaping the hot springs caused them to bubble more violently. This action caused what was left of the boy to rise to the surface, where Brady and his rangers skimmed about 8 pounds of the remains for burial. With all of that, the second stage of Superintendent Anderson and Cole's closure plan made things twice as bad at Old Faithful that year. The bears, displaced by food reductions at the Trout Creek dump, awoke that spring to find workers bulldozing dirt over Rabbit Creek and installing an electrified fence around a temporary landfill at Nez Perce Creek a couple of miles north. There were no power lines there, so a generator ran 24 hours a day, and a maintenance worker was assigned to monitor it. Alone out there at night, he witnessed huge grizzlies getting sparked off the fence, and as Brady understood it, was so unnerved by the experience that he refused to go back. Meanwhile, in a cooperative effort with the state of Montana to keep grizzlies off garbage along Yellowstone's boundaries, the town dump at West Yellowstone was closed that summer. However, as the lawyer Steven Zetterberg forced Starker Leopold to admit in his cross-examination, bears did not respond by suddenly switching to an all-natural diet. June of 1970 was exactly 2 months long, Brady remembered. Brady and his rangers spent their days dealing with people and their nights dealing with grizzlies. Scattered in the pines on the south side of the village was the housing for Park Service and concession employees. At night, grizzlies wandered the unlit gravel roads there, past the dormitories, houses, and trailers, looking for something or someone to eat. So Brady and his rangers were setting culvert traps, tranquilizing the bears, and relocating them. Toward the 4th of July weekend in 1970, a trap was set right in front of Brady's trailer. One night he was awakened by the sound of a steel gate clanging shut. Luckily, his wife and little girls were up at Mammoth Hot Springs at the time. It was about 2 a.m. He got up, looked out the front window to where the porch light cast a pool of light around the trap, and sure enough, it was sprung. Grizzlies mate between May and July, and Brady knew that around that time, if you trapped a female, there might be a male nearby. He got on the phone and woke up Mike Warren, a bear management ranger, and asked him to get his patrol car and drive around the housing area to see if there were other grizzlies around. Warren drove around, spotlighting the woods for about 15 minutes, then radioed an all clear and pulled up in front of Brady's trailer. Brady came out to meet him, leaving the trailer door ajar as the screen door sprung shut. The two of them peered into the trap and saw a sow that they'd handled before. Suddenly Warren said, "Run!" Both men sprinted for the safety of the trailer, dove underneath the porch railing, and tumbled right through the closed screen door, demolishing it. Brady slammed the trailer door behind them as a big male bear attacked the porch in frustration and then went over to the trap with the female inside and started banging on it with its paws. Brady got out a dart pistol, sat down at the kitchen table, and loaded a dart with enough sequestrin to put down a big bear or instantly kill a human being. His hands were shaking with the adrenaline. As he finished loading the pistol, he accidentally discharged it. The dart missed Warren narrowly and lodged in the ceiling. Brady loaded another, walked over to the door, cracked it open, and darted the big male with the first shot. The bear ran off into the darkness. Brady and Warren got into Warren's car and drove around the housing area looking for the bear. Time went by, long enough for the animal to have been immobilized and then come to again. Finally, they saw a light on in a small travel trailer and heard a woman screaming. The bear was up against the side of the trailer trying to turn it over. Brady darted it again. This time it went straight down. The two rangers went back to anesthetize the trapped female bear and towed the trap containing her over to the second bear. They woke up a couple of other rangers and tried to drag the big male into the trap, but he was too heavy. So they went to get a pickup with an electric winch, snaked the cable through the trap past the sow, winched the male in next to her, and slammed the gate. The 6-year-old male had been transplanted twice before and was sent to a zoo. Brady isn't sure what happened to the sow. That was how it was at Old Faithful in the summer of 1970. Anderson and Cole had ordered dump closure to proceed, and Brady was determined to make it through the year without a serious bear incident at Old Faithful. He almost did, or maybe he actually did. We may never know, because amid the daily chaos and all the good deeds of the rangers that summer, key evidence thought to be fragmentary human remains was mishandled and lost. And although Jim Brady could not have known it, the old grizzly that would later kill Harry Walker passed through his hands. Thank you very much. We're running almost right on time, but maybe have a little time to. Well, maybe I should ask you a question.
I think you should do it.
You could do some, yeah.
I'm curious, and maybe you can answer it in the book, how did they trap the elk? How do you trap an elk?
So how you trap elk is that you build, first of all, you look for a natural feature like a gully. And then you build a wing fence that starts out pretty far out on one side or the other, so the elk aren't scared of it. And you narrow that wing fence as you go in. And then you get to a tight spot, like a cattle chute, and it ends in a corral. And what they were doing at the time when they shot the elk was they would chase them, with people on foot and later with helicopters, and sometimes in the winter with snow machines, into these things, into the corral, close the gate, and then they would stand there and shoot into them until they were all dead. And the people who worked it said it was awful.
Thank
Thank you for asking that. Please.
Your description of when you kill, how many thousand elk? 4,000?
Well, that was just a single winter. In the winter, they killed thousands of them over the years, and they gave thousands away. They gave them away to 39 states and 2 foreign countries, Canada and Argentina, as a way of just getting rid of excess elk. But the process of trapping and trucking them was incredibly energy intensive, and it was much easier to kill them. The public didn't like it. So in that one winter of 61, 62, they killed over 4,300 elk that once, just in a matter of a couple of weeks.
It brought to mind what I think we're starting to do now, which is kill barred owls.
Right, yeah,
Spot owl.
yeah, right. Because of their
there's
effect on.
data that shows that where the barred owls aren't, the spotted owls are doing well.
Because of their effect on the spotted owl.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that, these sort of ethics of ecological manipulation. I have a question for you. This piece of yours kind of did not seem to me that it was saying just relax into this. It walked this very fine line between be joyful, it's like that Wendell Berry line from that one of the Mad Farmer poems. Be joyful though you have considered the facts. There's that energy, but somehow I didn't get just relax, there's nothing you can do. I didn't get that anti-activist feeling at all. I don't know how you did that.
Well, I can't answer how it did so much, but I think you're right. I mean, that last line there. I guess I've been thinking a lot about hope, and this conversation we had over the last 2 days too, in a couple of different sessions, about hope and if it's valuable for me to have hope and pack that around. I don't know. I always think of it as false hope for. We're talking about really our Earth, right, and the future of humanity. But I think it's useful for me to take action, to live a life of doing rather than to worry about the end. So that's where that idea comes from, I think.
There is a kind of fellowship in the camps, isn't there? That is all a joyful fellowship in the middle of getting, water sprayed on you in icy conditions. There's a kind of joy of being together.
And in looking at Standing Rock, for myself, I don't think I don't feel that